Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Paris Schutz. Illinois Democrats bask in the glow of their 2024 DNC victory.
This is an exciting day for Chicago, but also for the Midwest and the entire nation.
Chicago nabs the 2024 Democratic National Convention as Governor Pritzker promises it won't lose money. Will he open his own personal checkbook? Former ComEd CEO Ann Pramaggiore takes the stand in her own defense in the trial of the ComEd 4 as prosecutors tie her to an alleged Madigan-led bribery scheme. A Tribune investigation reveals chaos at the Cook County courts, where defendants wait years to get their cases heard.
Walmart, has been previewing this, shift for some time, and it certainly is unfortunate.
Walmart closes 4 stores across the city as Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson vows to replace them. And Blackhawks star Jonathan Toews laces up one last time before the adoring United Center crowd. A lot to get to tonight with our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Craig Delamore, political editor for WBBM News Radio, Megan Crepeau, reporter on the Violence and Criminal Justice beat at the Chicago Tribune, Steve Daniels of Crane's Chicago Business, and Ray Long, investigative reporter, also at the wonderful Chicago Tribune. Let's get right into it, everybody. Craig Delamore, how did Illinois Democrats seal this 2024 DNC deal?
It turns out the bottom line was the bottom line. It was with money. When everyone was saying it's because Chicago can embody the Biden-Harris ethos, but when Jamie Harrison, the party chair, came here and was asked exactly what made the difference, he said he admitted anyone could tell the story, but this is the city that said it had a financial package. This is going to cost $80 to $100 million to put on. No other city, Atlanta and New York, didn't promise to raise that amount of money. Illinois, Chicago did. And frankly, Governor Pritzker could pretty much, write a check.
It would be a rounding error. He can find it himself. Yeah. So Steve Daniels, is that kind of the clincher there? Governor Pritzker saying, hey, if there are shortfalls, we always have my wallet here.
I think so. I mean, certainly that was what Atlanta thought. And they basically said, that was the winner. I think they thought they had it, but for the governor billionaire. So I think that's right. It's a pretty straightforward story.
And Ray Long, they're saying, it's going to cost $80 to $100 million, but it could generate $150 million into a local economic boost. Do you buy that number?
I buy that there are going to be numbers that come rolling in here with this, because I was talking even to a cab driver this week, and he says, hey, this is going to be big money for me. I'm going to get a lot of stuff. And I said, aren't you going to worry about the traffic and all that kind of stuff? He says, no, I'll take it. I'll take the hassle. And I think he reflects a large part of the community that actually wants to get in and see Chicago get a boost out of this.
Although it is only a few days,
Right.
You're in the spotlight for a few days, the security, we've all, I think, covered some of these conventions. There are layers and layers of security. Megan Crepeau, is this going to be a moment for Chicago to shine?
I mean, it could be a logistical nightmare, or it could be a moment for Chicago to shine, right? And I think what we're all at this table hoping for is a repeat of what happened in '96 when the convention was here last time, and all the big shots got on the floor and did the Macarena together.
I was just going to say, do we want a repeat of the Macarena?
I would love to see
I think
that.
we need to bring it back.
Yes.
Yeah. It's been dead since then, I think. What's the dance?
What better time?
What's today's version of the Macarena?
68, I'm afraid.
TikTok?
Yeah.
TikTok?
The dances they were doing in '68 are not the kinds we want to do.
Those were not dances, I don't think, Ray Long.
That's true.
Well, what about that, Craig Delamore? I mean, is '96 generally considered a success?
96 was considered a success. It was not as big a financial success as people wanted it to be, but it still was. And the difference between then and now, I think, and I talked to Michael Jacobson, who's the head of the hotel industry trade group here. He said the difference is a lot of the hotels were in the suburbs the last time. There are many more hotel rooms in Chicago now, and he thinks they can almost contain all of the people who'll be coming within the city. That would be huge in terms of how much money people are spending and where they're spending
There's no
it.
doubt the hotel industry is thrilled at this.
Yeah.
And by the way,
Restaurants too.
And the restaurants, but they might also be occupied for the RNC too. As people go to Milwaukee, some of them might stay in Chicago.
Sure, why not? It's right down the road, baby. Just come on
Right
down.
down I-94.
Yeah.
Here's the question. So is it going to be Joe Biden getting the nomination at that convention? Do we sense any reason that he would say, no, I'm not going to run after all?
They said at the announcement that we are going to be here for when Joe Biden accepts his party's nomination. So I don't think it gets any more plain than that.
The only thing, and not to be macabre about it, but the man's old, so something could happen between now and then that would change that. But other than that, no.
Here's the other thing, Megan Crepeau. Republicans might try to tie Democrats to the violence problems in Chicago and say, see, Chicago is a poster child for democratic rule, and with democratic rule, you get violence.
Oh, so no pressure for that weekend, right? But no, I mean, obviously they're going to try to do that. They've been trying to do that all along. And this is probably an opportunity to showcase that this is a city with other features, right? We've got a beautiful downtown, you know, we can do the whole booster thing. You know, I would hope that we can all be clear-headed about the actual causes and the actual effects of violence without making it too political.
But politics always somehow seeps its way into that conversation. And speaking of public safety, Ray Long, there were some community hearings this week in this process to find a new superintendent with this new community advisory board that's going to lead the charge here. The name Ernest Cato came up. Remind us who that is.
Well, a former member of the police force, a ranking member of the police force who was well respected. And so his name came up, bubbled up through the community. They had a crowd and they were able to push his name. And as a result, I think he may have a little traction. Certainly Brandon Johnson wants policeman from inside the force, and he hasn't been gone that long, and he could certainly be a strong candidate.
Craig Dellamore, very early on in Brandon Johnson's transition, do you get a sense of who he might be favoring, some of the names that would rise to the top?
Not really. They're playing it close to the chest there. I think, and I'm betting that if names do come up, it may be kind of back channel, unlike what Rahm Emanuel did, where he just kind of presented his candidate.
He went around the process
Yes,
and
he
he said,
went entirely.
Eddie Johnson.
But in this case, the way it's set up, he can suggest that somebody apply for it, and he is allowed to talk to them about it. They say they'll take input from anyone. Well, the mayor is anyone, so I think he'll be able to at least make sure that his people he favors are in play. Whether he can guide it, I think this is going to be a panel. It's an interim panel, but it's still a panel that very much wants to show that it's independent of the mayor's office, and so they are not going to be, bamboozled into anything. But I think they're going to be listening.
You could always come back and take over and ram something through the city council and say, well, this process didn't work. I want it myself. I'm not saying that's the plan, but this is Chicago and things can happen.
Stranger things have happened. And speaking of Brandon Johnson, Craig Dellamore, he released some names on his transition team this week. Not surprisingly, most of them coming from the labor movement, right?
Yes, yeah. In fact, his director is Jessica Angus. She is chief of staff at SEIU Healthcare, which was one of the two big unions that helped finance his campaign. But the other names are from that realm. So yeah, it's going to be that, but it's other it's other people, and frankly, that's not the people who will be necessarily in government. Mm-hmm. Those are the people who are going to be finding the people in government. So we'll have to see where it goes from here.
I mean, that is, I think, an early issue. So one of the things that I think there are real questions about him is management. No experience whatsoever. No experience managing a budget of any kind. The city, that's for a mayor, that's really the job. I mean, it's putting out fires. It's managing the city's finances.
But in this transition team, do you see any people that can pick up those blind spots?
I don't. On the surface. So the question is, are there other people talking, whispering? Are they going to turn to some kind of old hands who know how this works? One thing you can say about, or I will say about Lori Lightfoot, is that she had really, really sharp financial people around her. I mean,
And a lot of people that had come from the previous
outstanding.
administration.
Yeah, just outstanding. And
Yeah, the 3 women who ran her finance office operation are top flight. In fact, you'd wonder if any of them might be able to stick around, or if you would want them to.
But Megan Crepeau, I mean, the other side of it is to the victory, victor go the spoils. This was a victory for the Chicago Teachers Union and the progressive movement, so would it make sense that he's going to staff his administration with folks along those lines?
I think that sounds perfectly natural. And I think, you know, you've got big people with experience in big unions, key unions. SEIU is enormous, right, and very politically active. That might not be traditional management experience, but that involves wrangling a lot of people with a lot of different interests, and that might be valuable.
And if I can just add one quick thing. The Cook County Board is a lot more into the minutia of the budgets than the Chicago City Council. They actually do get into those kinds of things. So he may not have managed the budget, but he knows how to dig into it like the county board members tend to do.
The budget at City Council gets dropped on the councilman's desk, and then they vote on it about 5 minutes later, as it happens in the state, Ray Long, as you've seen many times. Let's talk about the ComEd 4 trial. Steve Daniels, CEO, Anne Pramaggiore, the former CEO, is taking the stand this week in her own defense. How does she paint this picture that what went on between them and Madigan had nothing to do with bribery or trying to get a bill passed?
well, that's her task. So, I mean, first of all, it was interesting that she decided to take the stand, right? I mean, that's unusual. It doesn't typically happen in trials like this. So they clearly, her team clearly decided we need to do that. I mean, we've got all of these recordings where she sounds like, you know, something like a mafia boss at times. I mean, not to make light of it, but they're not good. They're damaging, and so. That's her job, or will be her job once she is facing
and
prosecutors.
it's funny, like she started by kind of talking about her biography and how she was an athlete, and you know, she's just like the woman next door.
Yeah, she was a champion walker in races. She actually walked when she was a kid, but she also talked about being a substitute paper boy and things like that to try to humanize her. But she is practiced at just coming at people and coming with a specific script. When her speechwriters had assignments to go out there, she would load them up with specific things for the specific audience. So she is practiced, and she's looking at the jury in the eye, and she's looking out at the audience, and she's just really well composed on the stand.
And that's the thing, the prosecution rested its case after several weeks, dozens of witnesses, recordings, video, audio recordings. Did they effectively make the case here that these jobs that went to Madigan Allies where no work was really done did constitute bribery in exchange for getting that bill passed that netted them $2 billion?
Well, that's the leap that the jurors are going to need to make in order to convict these people. So everybody would look at this and agree all of this is highly unethical. Right. I mean, even the people caught on those tapes didn't want all that stuff out in the public. They were trying to hide it from people within their company and people externally. So you don't try to hide things that you're proud of. So at the very least, they would conclude that. But then is it criminal? Does it constitute bribery? That's a different thing. And it's going to come down to jury instructions and then how seriously the jury follows those. And then, one, I think, problem here is that Madigan did not benefit himself financially from this. Typically in bribery schemes, there's somebody, pocketing money. Right. And in evidence, they haven't been allowed to say how much Anne Pramaggiore actually made at ComEd. They just said...
It was all these kind of lower-level Madigan allies that got the money, got the paychecks. I mean, Ray Long, you wrote the book on Madigan. This is kind of how it operated in so many different pieces of legislation.
Well, it was real interesting because Ed Mooney, a precinct captain for Madigan, legendary for being one of the top-flight precinct captains who would be able to turn precincts around, be able to turn legislative races around, testified against Pramaggiore, and he got up there and was able to say that I talked to Madigan about getting one of these contracts. I got one of these contracts finally after a heated discussion with Madigan. Madigan said, you're going to get your $45,000, but guess what? you're going to get your contract, but if you don't do the politics, you'll lose it.
And he basically said he knew who he worked for, and that was Mike Madigan.
Right.
He was not
Right.
working for ComEd, even if he was being paid by them. Megan Crepeau, I want to get to this investigation that you worked on that came out this week. You've worked on this for about a year with the Cook County court system. Your investigations found that 90% of these cases take longer than 2 years to adjudicate, and the courts say they want to get all these cases adjudicated within 2 years. Put that into context, the scope of the problem here.
Oh, sure. Well, look, we only looked at murder cases, the most serious cases where it's most likely that someone's going to be locked up pre-trial, presumed innocent. And what we found is that the median time for a case to be resolved is more than 4 years. Median, obviously, half take longer. So we've got guys locked up 4, 5, 6, 8, almost 10 years without a trial.
And you were asking the court chief, Tim Evans, like, what's the deal here? Who are the culprits for this?
Oh, well, I think of that court system as lying at the intersection, like the middle of the Venn diagram of all these different bureaucracies that are going to have different habits, different interests, different motivations. And that's the way that these kinds of problems really get entrenched. I mean, there's dysfunction at every level here. At every step of the case, there's opportunity for things to get jammed up, and it often does.
And you know, the question that comes to my mind is, how does this square with the Constitution when everyone theoretically has the right to a speedy and fair trial?
Not theoretically. I mean, that is bedrock constitutional law, right? The U.S. Constitution. Now, in Illinois, state statute has built kind of like a scaffolding around that, put some boundaries on it. What Illinois law says that, yes, you have the right to a speedy trial. You need to invoke it. Once you invoke it, prosecutors have 120 days if you're in custody. They got to bring you to trial in that window. Now, the thing with these cases is that that early on, you're probably not going to have the opportunity to see all the evidence against you because that can take years to come in, that potential evidence. You're probably not going to have the opportunity to argue to a judge your certain legal theories. You might not have basic forensics, basic police reports for years in these cases. So what we heard from defense attorneys and from the defendants themselves is that they know that it would not be wise to invoke your right to a speedy trial because it's going to put you at a disadvantage. They're kind of stuck.
Wow, I mean, it's an amazing amount of work I urge everyone to check out that Tribune series and the work you've put in. Craig Delmore, I mean, it would behoove Democrats who've made prison reform a big part of their plank to perhaps step in and do something.
But I think the problems that Megan just outlined, though, mean even if you had the good intention to do those things, the solutions aren't all that simple. Because what do you do about getting the evidence in? Do you change the rules of evidence so that things come faster? Do you have to step up the labs to get the evidence through faster? Because right now, a lot of those labs have backlogs. So yeah, none of it is easy. That's the problem with this, is that you can't wave a magic wand and change the entire system. You can know what you're doing, but still, there's inertia here.
But at the same time, your investigation found that Cook County lags pretty much similar jurisdictions across the country.
Sure, and actually to your point, I think there's also potentially a danger here if someone were to say like, oh, well, we got to meet these deadlines, we're going to rush everything through, we're going to railroad
really
it.
hurt
That's
someone's
not a
case.
Solution either, right? It's a multifaceted solution for really, really entrenched dysfunction that's been going on for years. That is not going to be an easy answer.
Nope, no easy answers there and anywhere in the criminal justice system in Cook County. I want to move on to some business news. Steve Daniels, 4 Walmarts closing. They basically say that they can't make any money, they don't net money in Chicago. Why does that company have such a hard time getting traction here?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, Walmart, you can go back to when they came into town. It was a big deal.
Huge debate
It
over
was
the
a
big box
giant
and
controversy,
unionization.
and are they going to be unionized or not? And there was a big battle over that. Ultimately, they came in, but they came in not in a way that you would want to come in if you're a big name like that. So I start there. Otherwise, I think some of the neighborhoods that not all of them that they're closing stores in, but the big store in Chatham, and that's really the focal point here. The big store in Chatham is the issue. Target closed there too, right? There's something about that part of town that is very difficult for these big box retailers.
But there are a lot of residents in Chatham, so where are they going to go to get groceries?
And to hear people in the neighborhoods tell it, the store's always full. I think we may be looking at some kind of different standard for what is profitable than what our common sense would tell us, because if the store is always filled and people are buying things, then why aren't they making money? And so I don't know where the leak is.
Well, what that tells me is that private enterprise is fickle, right? We all want investment in neighborhoods, but it can't just come from businesses that can decide up to move out of town. I mean, I'm thinking about the Whole Foods in Englewood. Great Whole Foods, gone.
And I've been into that Whole Foods a few times.
Sure.
I saw customers in there. I can't tell whether or not it was enough to keep the store going. I don't know those metrics, but people are shopping at these places.
I want to add one more thing about this. Chicago right now, in the eyes of business, and I work for Crane Chicago Business, is not a healthy place to do business. That's not the reputation. Fair or not, people can argue and quibble all they want to. It's up to that store to decide whether, or that company to decide whether they want to be here or not. And no amount of yelling at them is going to change that. So at some point, people are going to have to come to terms with that and say, okay, well, let's actually go to these business people and say, what's wrong? What's the issue? And then start there. Actually listen to them instead of yelling at them or chastising them or what have you.
A task for Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson?
Sure, he's got many tasks on his plate, but losing businesses is one that he wants to put high on his priority list.
Yeah.
It's not just the Walmarts, but the big headquarters that have left, and McDonald's has talked about problems
It's coming
here.
at it from all directions.
All right, also faculty from a bunch of public universities are going on strike. Governor State, Eastern Illinois, Chicago State, potentially Northeastern Illinois, right next to us here. Is this just in the air right now, this labor unrest at higher education?
Yeah, well, there's clearly is. But I think you see a lot of times in the labor movement sort of copycat strikes. If something is successful, and particularly if a contract sets a standard, and UIC professors, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they came to a contract recently. And I think a lot of the faculty at these other schools are looking at that and saying, what about us? And a lot of them recently unionized, and dealing with a state and a city now, with Brandon Johnson's election, hey, it's all about unions. J.B. Pritzker couldn't be more of a friend to unions. So if you are a state employee, and these people are, and you say, look at what they got, and why aren't my friends in the governor's office, the mayor's office, helping me?
We were talking about this before the show, Craig Dorm. Labor has made huge inroads, but all in the nonprofit sector, the Museum of Science and Industry, these universities. But what about Walmart, like we mentioned? What about Amazon, Starbucks?
I think with the state universities, with the nonprofits, you're dealing with a finite pile of money. And so these schools aren't necessarily able to give as much as people might want. Walmart and Amazon, they do have the deep pockets where they could pay their people more. The problem is you're going up against a machine that also can afford big lawyers and anti-labor firms that come in and that will fight this tooth and nail, whether it's in the courts or whether it's in their halls. And that's a harder enemy to fight for unions, harder to organize there. So I think they're going for the places where people are clamoring for them first, and then are going to attack these big targets.
I know folks at the Tribune have nothing to say on that. Big companies that don't like unions very much. We get a close-up on Ray Long's button there, Mark Shakin. There you go.
Megan has one too. Don't forget her.
Yeah. You're all
Former
representing.
president of the guild.
That's right.
We are proud of those of us who are union members. Are proud of them for standing up for their rights.
Before we go tonight, we got to talk about the Supreme Court. Justice Samuel Alito just today issues a order putting a stay on ending the sales of the abortion pill. What does that mean for folks that are seeking this out?
Oh, sure. A stay means that it's going to be available up until, this whole matter makes its way through the court system. And I assume the actual matter will get to the Supreme Court eventually, which is going to be fascinating, and I think it's going to be tough for a lot of people to watch. I mean, I see it as, I don't know, I've covered the courts a long time on a much smaller scale, right? But it's true on the smaller scale and it's true on the larger scale. Judges are operating in a political arena. They are political animals. We can say all we want about the impartial, nature of the system, but in the real world, it's just not quite true. And these dueling rulings, right, from across the country about the abortion pill just really bring that home for me.
Shocking to our viewers that politics has seeped into the justice system.
Scandalous.
Yes, but that is the state of affairs. We are out of time. Great discussion. Our thanks to Megan Crepeau, Craig Delamore, Steve Daniels, and Ray Long. And that is our show for this Friday night. Join us tonight at 10 for Chicago Tonight. And now for the Week in Review, I'm Paris Schutz. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you in about 2.5 hours. All right, so does anyone want to check the score of the Bulls game right now?
Yes, please do.
All right, what do we?
Anyone at this table the person who paid $2.2 million for the Last Dance shoes?
The Last Dance show from the documentary?
No, from like the shoes that Jordan wore in Game 2 of the '98 finals.
No one at this table.
Are you sure?
I didn't want to say.
Maybe someone at Alden did. Looks like the Bulls are down by 8 in the third quarter here. So this is a play-in game, right?
Yeah.
Oh, we didn't mention Jonathan Toews. Anyone have any memories of Jonathan Toews? He's
Captain
Blackhawk.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that's proud to serve its community through pro bono legal services.